got up and I said, Dad, I love you. And I put my arm around him and I hugged him. I didn't love him. I didn't want to hug him. And he took me and he pushed me away. He said, oh, stop that nonsense, and walked off. And the tears came. And I got up and I went and walked in the garden. And I just said, Lord, I've hugged him. He didn't receive it. I've done what you told me to do. But in doing what he told me to do, the ice broke around my heart. It did something inside me, even though he didn't receive my hug and didn't receive anything, and it didn't change his attitude towards me. For me, it broke something that I realized he had the problem. I didn't have the problem. It sort of made me, it just was a whole new revelation. I think God wanted me to do that, not for my dad, obviously for me. But in doing that, I just felt free. I just felt, you don't owe me anymore. I'm not tired.
Hey friends, before we dive into this awesome episode, I have a question for you. Are you already dreading the holidays because of notoriously difficult, toxic, or abusive family members? You are not the only one, and that's why I created my free Happier Holidays action plan. This step-by-step guide will help you reclaim your confidence, peace, and joy this season before the holiday drama even begins. It will walk you through establishing boundaries through clear and calm communication, navigating the family peacemaker who suggests you're too sensitive when your boundaries are violated, and even planning a just-in-case strategy if things escalate. Keep your cool, your peace, and your joy this year with my free Happier Holidays action plan. Download your copy now with the QR code on YouTube or the link in the podcast show notes. This may be your best holiday season yet. Now, back to this fabulous episode. Welcome to the Room to Bloom podcast, equipping you to live redefined, renewed, and restored. I'm your host, Julie Rebboah. Let's tackle this week's topic. Welcome to another episode of the Room to Bloom podcast. This week, we have special guest Karin Thompson, and she's going to talk to us about improving our self-confidence, because sometimes our self-confidence becomes damaged with incidents of child abuse, neglect, bullying, and mental health challenges. So, using her strategies, we can begin to take control of our lives and leave a positive generational legacy. So, I'm so excited that you're here, Karin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I look forward to our conversation.
Me too. So please tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
I am married for 47 years to my husband, James. I have two married boys and I have 3 grandkids that are just absolutely delightful. I am an author. I write full time. So I'm forever got a story in my head. I'm forever reading, writing something and working on something. And I'm active in my church. I teach at my church at the ladies' meeting, and I just love Jesus.
Wonderful. Well, that's why you're here. So, could you please share with us your personal experience with childhood trauma? What is the backstory?
I was born in a family. My father was very violent, I don't know. He was just an angry, angry man. He went through World War II. They're from Dutch extract, my parents, and they were very involved in the World War II, growing up with it and dealing with it. And I'm sure he had a lot of PTSD and obviously depression and all those big words that no one knew anything about in those days. And he just lived on his last nerve. So you never knew when he was going to explode or trigger or something was going to happen. So he was extremely violent. Even though he never drank, he never drank, he was just a very angry man. So he would have beat us and abuse us and do horrible things to us. And that was my background. I grew up in a home where I just lived on my tiptoes and tried to disappear into the shadows so that I never triggered them off. And of course, there were 3 of us. And then my mother as well. So we all tiptoed around each other, trying to keep the peace and trying to keep him happy. But he had so much turmoil inside him. He just was never going to be happy. And that was my background.
So I know many people can relate to having to tiptoe around the home in an attempt to keep peace, but
Mm.
does it work?
It doesn't because, my dad was a coffee drinker and he drank a lot of coffee. And so my dad didn't do any form of work besides going to his job. When he came home, the gate was open, the slippers were there, the newspaper was there, the food was there. He didn't do, I mean, he would stand next to the kettle and tell you to switch it off because there wasn't automatic kettles in those days. He did no form of work. And he would demand a lot of coffee. And between the three of my sisters and I, we just couldn't get the coffee right. And we had coffee that had granules. We got to the stage where we would count the granules, 20 granules, and maybe the coffee would be good. No, the coffee was too strong. Okay, so we put 19 in. No, the coffee was too weak. So we would cut it in half. No, the coffee's still not right. I mean, there was just no pleasing him. So no matter how much you try to make your life better and accommodate him, I don't think he even knew what he wanted. There was just no perfect cup of coffee. And you couldn't say to him, listen, make your own, if you can do better, go help yourself, but because that would just be a slap. So it was just endless, a defeatless purpose, really. You just weren't good enough.
Right. And I think many people can relate to that as well. Tiptoeing around someone and trying to appease them never really solves the underlying problem with whatever it is going on that's
Yeah.
causing that anger. And so, may I ask, how are you using your experience now to help people overcome their own childhood trauma?
Oh, I share a lot, especially at my ladies group. Actually, Julie, you'd be surprised how many people have trauma in their life. When I share my story, because I'm very open about it, and people come and talk to me, I'm so amazed how many homes were just so abusive. And when I share my story, besides all the tears, and it's so hard to see these older ladies, 82, crying because their fathers abused them. And my society, our age group, and years before that, no one talked about anything. So they've been carrying this burden and this load for years, thinking that they're the bad people, but they just don't know how to talk about it. So I've really found sharing my journey and writing my book has helped so many people. And I'm so grateful that God can use my story to encourage other people. Such a blessing, really is.
So, tell us about your book.
My book, My Journey to Enjoying My Life, it's about me discovering that I'm not normal, that I have issues. And issues. I had a lot of issues. Oh my goodness. And about me discovering that things that I do weren't right. And then I realized my home life wasn't right because, like I say, you don't go tell everybody. So I didn't know what a normal home life was like. I just thought this is life. And then you suddenly realize this is not life. So I wrote a book about it and shared my journey to getting out of the abuse, finding myself, finding who I am, discovering my life with God and letting him heal me, teaching me to forgive, teaching me to get back on track. Find me. Who is Karin? What does she want? Who does she want to be? Instead of being my father's daughter and walking in his shadow, finding out who I am in Jesus. And that's what my book was all about. I've got some steps, I've got some prayers, I've got some confessions. It's not an easy journey, Julie. It's very in your face. I mean, there are so many tears. I even say in my book that I'm surprised I don't have stains on my cheeks from all the tears that I cried because, there's always that question, why me? What did I do to deserve this? And, those kind of questions just don't have answers. It's just you're born into a family with a man who's got problems. He doesn't, he doesn't know how to deal with them either. So it's just a whole repercussion. But I decided I was going to stop it. I wasn't going to become an abusive person, and my whole family was going to suffer because of what I suffered. So I wrote a book about it, and praise God, it's doing well. It's blessed people, and it's such a privilege to be able to share with people.
So, I wanted to ask, when did you begin to realize that your home life was not typical or what we would consider good for raising children?
It wasn't really till I got married, had my own children, and then I just became another version of my father. I became very angry. I threw pots and pans. I screamed and shouted. I also lived on my last nerve. And it wasn't until I saw my oldest son, he must have been about 3 or 4, I don't remember the exact age. But when I started shouting at him and I saw him cringe like I used to, when I saw my dad, when I'd lie on my bed and I'd hear my dad's footsteps coming down the passage. And then I used to pray, please don't come to my door. Please don't open the door. Please don't. When I saw my son look at me the way I looked at my dad, that fear in his eyes, oh my goodness, all the lights went on and I realized I've got problems. There's issues. Like I say, people never talked in those days. There was no Google, there was no Wikipedia. I mean, in the encyclopedia, if you looked up the word abuse, there wasn't much to say. There was just no conversations. And then I started diving into what's wrong with me. And I tell you what, when I found out how wrong our home life was, it was a shock. It was absolutely a shock, because we never talked. Nobody talked. And we didn't have family. My parents left Holland and I lived in South Africa at the time. So there was no family. And he didn't have a lot of friends, and my mom never brought friends over, and I never brought friends home. So, and you never sort of went to other people's houses. So you just thought, this is life. This is, everyone lives like this. Huh. How wrong was I?
So it sounds like when you saw your son cringe as a reaction to your presence, that was a pivotal moment in your life. And so you were discussing that you had a lot of anger that you needed to overcome. Was there anything else that you needed to overcome? And I'm just asking not to shame anybody, but often we learn the behaviors that we saw, that we heard, that we experienced ourselves.
I had very low self-esteem. I felt like I was a nobody. I didn't feel worthy of anything. I mean, if I went to visit you and you said coffee or tea, I'd say whatever you want. I couldn't make my mind up about anything. I didn't know what my favorite color was. I had no identity. He stripped all that from me because all my life, and I was at home for 17 years, all I did was try to avoid this man. So all my life, I just tried to please him. And my whole life became his identity. And then unfortunately, when I left home, I took him with me, not physically, but in my mind, in my actions, in my body. I became my dad junior. And when that dawned on me, it was such a shock because you actually hate what he does, but yet you do it. You often hear of people, their dad's an alcoholic and they swear they never drink. And what do? They drink. It's just like that demon follows the one person and goes on to the next person. And the realization that you become your abuser. Now you become the abuser. And that had to stop. That just was not on. I was not going to have that happen in my home life for sure.
So it sounds like that recognition, that awareness caused you to say, I'm going to become a cycle breaker. I'm not going to repeat what happened to me to my son. And, often those are what the Bible calls generational curses, that behaviors that pass down from the grandparent to the parent to you. And at some point, somebody's got to say, it stops with me. And so how did you begin to break that cycle for yourself and your family?
First of all, I cried a lot. And I talk about tears in my books because tears, when you're hurting, are never wasted. Tears are a way of healing, breaking the barrier and the mold. And then I've always been a prayer. I started asking God for help. It's not to say he didn't want to help me before. It's just that I was not aware that I had a problem. I mean, my hubby and I used to fight and I used to think he was the problem because there was only two of us. Not me, so it's got to be him, And when I realized that, my goodness, the guy's a saint, it's me. It was such a shock. So I started asking God for help, show me how to deal with my temper. And he taught me to count because the kids would do something and I would just go off my tangent. And then I would start reacting. And then he said to me, go into your bedroom and just start counting. Well, I'd sit there sometimes and count to 5,000 because it took me that long to cool down, And then afterwards, I'd be calm, cool, and back, okay. And then I think about it and I think, this was nothing. It was just a little thing, leave it. And I'd call them back and say, it's okay, guys. And you could just see the relief on the face because they didn't know what was coming. And then God got me teaching material. And then every sermon you go to, my goodness, it's like God is talking to you. There's that little word, forgive, and there's that little word, let go, trust me. There's that other little word. And so everywhere you go, you're like in school, but you're not actually in a building. It's just a whole teaching academy. And of course, the more you want to get better, the more you open yourself to healing, the more God can work. And praise God, I wanted to change. I didn't like me one little bit. And I could actually see when I walked into a room, people didn't know which Karin's coming. The nice Karin, the angry Karin, the happy Karin, the sad Karin. And I just thought, I mean, I wouldn't even want to be with people like that. So who's going to want to be with me? I don't even like myself. So it just, it had to change. It just had to.
So you mentioned the strategy of counting and how counting changed your perspective on the situation, and it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. And then you talked about discerning God's teaching and God's leading just about everywhere that you went.
Mm.
And so I think that's really an important thing, that when we're seeking healing and we ask God to help us, He just drops little clues all over the place and starts directing us. And
Yeah.
so, do you have any advice for people how they can begin to discern God's teaching when they are really wanting to heal? How do you know that that's God leading you?
Because you'll be uncomfortable. Like my God first said to me, you need to forgive your father. And I thought to myself, are you joking? I thought I heard wrong, because I said to the Lord, it almost felt like I was saying, okay, if I forgive you, everything you did, I'm saying, tick, it's okay. I'm letting you off the hook. And no, nothing you did was good. Nothing you did was right. But then the Lord showed me that forgiveness was not for me, him, it was for me. I'm the one that's got issues, and the only person you can fix is you. You can't fix your past. You can't fix other people. You can only heal yourself. You can only deal with yourself. And from there, things will change. So I had to learn to forgive. And it was uncomfortable. It was hard. God was very patient. So when God speaks to you, especially when you've got trauma, a lot of the healing journey is, I'm not doing that. I won't do that. It's a lot of you fight against it, because it's digging deep. It's digging up stuff. You might have to go and say sorry to some people. You might have sworn at someone, done something uncomfortable. I have to apologize to my kids and to my husband for being, so unkind. And, when you're angry, you don't, you don't filter your words. You just speak. And then afterwards you think, did I really say that? And unfortunately words hang around. So you will be uncomfortable, but the healing that takes place because you're obedient is so worth it. And restoration. I'm married 47 years. It's just, it's only God. It's nothing else, because, I had my drama. And I'm not saying I waved a married magic wand and next day I'm healed. It took a while. It took a long time. But praise God, I can truly say today that I have no baggage of it anymore. It's left me, and I'm over it. So you'll be uncomfortable, definitely.
So it sounds like there's an element of humility and obedience in following what God is leading us to do in our healing journey. But how did taking that step to apologize, how did it impact your relationships?
People that love you, once they, you don't go around telling everyone your story, but once you do explain some things to people, look, I've come from a bad path, and I just didn't realize how bad I was. You find people are compassionate. But what people think of you and what people do with your apology is actually none of your business, because how they react and how they treat you, it doesn't matter. If they want to carry a chip on their shoulder and be angry with you, that's between them and God. You do you, and you heal you, and you work with you. Our family, there was no hugging and kissing, ever, ever. My mom never told me she loved me. I didn't even know what love was, ever. So when God said to me, I need to forgive my dad, he said to me, go and hug your father. Now, my dad was a very big man. His hand, when it hit you, it covered your entire face. And I told my husband that I have to go and talk to my dad. And so we would go that weekend, and I would sit there, and literally the whole chair would shake. I was so scared to hug my father. And eventually he walked past me. I got up and I said, Dad, I love you. And I had put my arm around him, and I hugged him. I didn't love him. I didn't want to hug him. And he took me and he pushed me away. He said, oh, stop that nonsense, and walked off. And the tears came. And I got up and I went and walked in the garden, and I just said, Lord, I've hugged him. He didn't receive it. I've done what you told me to do. But in doing what he told me to do, the ice broke around my heart. It did something inside me, even though he didn't receive my hug and didn't receive anything, and it didn't change his attitude towards me. For me, it broke something that I realized he had the problem. I didn't have the problem. It just was a whole new revelation. I think God wanted me to do that, not for my dad, obviously for me. But in doing that, I just felt free. I just felt, you don't owe me anymore. I'm not tied to you anymore. It just broke something. When you start being obedient to what God instructs you to do, it just brings healing to you. It's part of your healing journey. And that's what happened for me.
Well, I thank you for sharing that personal experience, because sometimes when we try to forgive or give an apology or try to reconcile in obedience to God, people have free will. They can take it or they can leave it. And we need to be okay with either outcome,
Yeah.
knowing that we've done our best, that we've done what God has asked us, and have peace no matter what, because their response is their responsibility, right?
Exactly.
I think that's
Exactly.
really important. But before, you were also talking about how your people pleasing and your identity was really tied up with your father's. And I know so many people can relate to that. I myself had to overcome people pleasing in an effort to try to mitigate the chaos in my own home. And so, how would you suggest people begin to reclaim their own identity, their God-given identity, and break free from one from their past?
I had to decide, what kind of person does Karin Thompson want to be? What kind of woman do you want to be? I wanted to be a godly woman. I wanted to be a godly wife, a godly mother. I wanted to be a strong woman. I wanted to be a confident woman. I wanted to be a person that had my life sorted out. I wanted to be a person that I could hold my head up high. So I had all these long-term goals. That's what I wanted. But I said to myself, okay, now how am I going to achieve this? What steps will I take to become a godly woman? All right, I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to pray. I'm going to listen to tapes about women. I'm going to read books about women. I'm going to study. What is a woman? What does a woman do? How does a woman function? How do I want to be a godly mother? Well, I'm going to start reading my Bible about parenting. I'm going to start seeing what does God say about bringing up children. So everything I did that I wanted, I started looking for information. I started crying out for wisdom. And knowledge is power. The more I sought things, the more I bumped into specialists that could help me with things. Books came across my path. I listened to tapes. I go to teaching seminars. I joined a group of ladies. I just made my world become what I wanted. So I have these goals, and then someone would say, let's do X, Y, Z. Then I'd think, is this what I want to do? Is this what I want to be? Is this going to fulfill me and make me this person that I'm working towards? And if it didn't, I'd say no. Because people pleasing, you say yes to everything, and then you end up going down roads you shouldn't be going down, with people you shouldn't be with, because you just can't say no. So I had to learn to narrow my life down to what I wanted to be, because now I'm a full-time mom. I've got 2 little toddlers. I've got a husband. I've got to clean the house. I've got to do groceries. I've got all the stuff that women do. Plus now I've got my own life that I'm trying to sort out. So I haven't got time to go on detours down, let's go window shopping and buy the best dress in town. I want to just work on my stuff. And the more I focused on it, creating habits that made me the person I wanted to be and set my goals being the person I wanted to be, the more the old Karin chipped away. I found out I prefer coffee to tea. And yet all these years I was drinking tea just because I didn't want to upset anybody. But now when people say, "Want a cup of tea?" I'm a coffee drinker. And I learned what color do I want. I changed my entire wardrobe because I started to dress like he dressed my mom. And then I realized, no, I don't like these clothes. Everything changed. As I went on my journey, I started finding out what I liked. And it was exciting in a way, because it's like you're just reborn. You know, not just with Jesus as a new Christian in Christ, but you just find yourself. You know, what makes you happy? What makes me tick? Well, that was a journey. You know, what do I like? I found a lot that I didn't like, which was so good. And I started changing things. And it was really interesting, really a beautiful thing to do.
So it sounds like the first step that you took was to identify what your own goals were. And for you, that was to become a godly woman and mother and wife. And then you thought about, okay, now how am I going to get to that place from where I am? And so then you sought and asked for wisdom, and you found it. And then you had to devise boundaries based on your priorities. And those priorities were aligned with your goals. And so for many people, saying no and prioritizing your own well-being, and that's for a season. Sometimes we can be self-focused. God wants us to heal, and sometimes that requires prioritization and setting boundaries. And so for somebody who might still really feel uncomfortable with saying no, how would you suggest they begin to practice that?
I think if someone asks you a question and you don't want to, if you can't say no, say, can I get back to you? And that'll give you some time to wrap your mind around it and give you the confidence to say no. Not every question has to be answered straight away. Often a spontaneous yes, you've said yes, and you think, what was I thinking? Do I know what's involved in this yes? And then you realize you've just given away weeks of your life just because you didn't want to say no. So I had to learn, can I get back to you on that? And then I'd wait because I knew I didn't want to do it. Then I'd wait to see when they come back. And I'd say, look, I've given it some thought and I'm sorry, it's not for me. And we don't always have to explain ourselves. We don't, just because I don't want it doesn't mean I must give you my whole life history and I tell you, look, I was abused. I always said yes to my father. Blah, blah, blah. You don't have to explain yourself. If people can't take your no politely and with respect, then maybe the no was the right thing to do because a yes would have been very wrong. You would have been maybe bogged down in a big tunnel. Some people, when you give them a finger, they take your whole hand, and next thing feeding the poor and volunteering for everything, and you've got no life. So just pause. There's no harm in pausing. We don't have to always be in such a hurry to just give away our entire life. There are a lot of good causes. And like Jesus says, the poor will be with you always. But it doesn't mean that it's all your responsibility and that it's all going to be your cause. You have to find your cause, your road, and your passion. So you have to find your crowd that you can say yes to and say no to everything else.
So important to pause. And sometimes when we say yes too quickly, we become the yes person.
Yes.
And then they keep turning to us over and over again because they believe that we will say yes. But when we say yes to things that aren't necessarily for us, we're saying no to other things because we still only have the same 24 hours in a day. So, yeah, I really like what you said about pausing and thinking about it and getting back to people because not everything demands an instant answer. But also with saying no, that requires some self-confidence. So if we're lacking self-confidence, how can we begin to build that up in our lives?
I had terrible self-confidence. I had a lot of shame. I could never understand why when my father saw me, he would go into this wild rage and just want to go mad. And I thought, there must be something wrong here with me that I could make a man so angry. And then I realized I didn't have the problem. He had the problem. I had a lot of shame and I had to learn to start loving myself. We are taught we've always got to give and be a blessing to others and encourage others. But until you can deal with yourself and love yourself and look in the mirror and say, you know what, girl, you're all right. You're doing the best you can. You're on a journey. You haven't arrived, but boy, you are well on your way. I had to learn to change my self-talk. I used to talk to myself so badly. I mean, I would talk that if I ever had a friend that talked to me like the way I talk to myself, I would have wanted to slap her face. How dare you talk to me like that? But yet I was talking to myself like that. I mean, if you're not your own best cheerleader, if you don't support yourself and care about yourself, who is? You have to be kind to yourself first before anyone else will be. So I started changing my self-talk. I say to myself, Karin, you've got this. You can do this. You've done this before. You've got through things before. You're a clever person. You've come through life. Look how you've done things. And I encourage myself. Honestly, I am my best support cheerleader. When I have a problem now, I say to myself, Karin, you've been here before and you got through that. Look how much stronger you are and you're a strong person. And I give myself my pep talk. And I say, come on, girl, up you go. You can do this. And then when I do something good, I say, oh, good girl. And I tell you, it changes your whole inside. You start, I actually like myself. There are things that I do that I think that's nice that I do that. I'm glad I'm that kind of person. There are things I don't like. And I say, okay, look, we're going to have to work on that, But I think we have to start talking to ourselves kindly, respect ourselves. We want everyone else to respect us, but we don't respect ourselves. We don't treat ourselves well. And I think we have to start working on that first before anything else can change, Be the person that you want other people to treat you as,
Well, you said some really powerful things. And one of them was you realized that at some point your father was the one with the problem. And so when you realized that, you were able to assign responsibility for the way he treated you to him versus taking and accepting responsibility for that yourself, which sometimes we come to that point where we realize it's them and it's not us. And then the other thing you mentioned was that you had to grow in self-love and grace. And that made me think of that old saying, what would Jesus do? WWJD, what would Jesus say us and about us? How would Jesus treat us? And often what he would do and how he would treat and talk to us and think about us, the ways that he would do that are not aligned with the way that we treat ourselves or think about ourselves. And so I think if we can dive into some scripture and really try to see ourselves and others through Jesus's eyes, it's more easier to grow in self-love and offer grace to ourselves and others. So thank you, Karin, for sharing your life journey. It has really inspired a lot of thought and given us some strategies that we can use to really improve our self-confidence and our faith, and some practical strategies so that we can begin to enjoy our lives as well. God bless you, Karin. Thanks for joining me. I hope this episode has blessed you. If so, please subscribe, comment, and share. It's a great way to spread the love and keep good content rolling. As a reminder, this podcast is purely for informational and educational purposes only. Listening to content is not a replacement for medical or mental health care. Please make decisions with your personal care providers. Stay tuned for next week's episode. But if you want more content or free resources in the meantime, head over to FromBudToBloom.com. See you next time. Until then, live fully free in Christ.